Bueno, buenas tardes. Vamos a empezar esta séptima sesión ya de esta segunda jornada, la cuarta mesa redonda. Antes de nada, quiero disculpar la presencia de Raquel Zubizarreta. Ella era la persona que iba a moderar esta mesa, pero por motivos personales ha tenido que ausentarse y no va a poder acompañarnos. Y bueno, empezamos bastante tarde, casi 40 minutos tarde, entonces le he pedido a los dos ponentes que hagan un esfuerzo en la medida de lo posible por intentar acortar sus presentaciones y quizá no tengamos tiempo para hacer preguntas, ¿vale? Entonces, durante los próximos 40-45 minutos, los dos ponentes que a continuación presentaré hablarán sobre la situación actual del consumo del cannabis en España y su legislación a nivel europeo. En primer lugar, hablará Fernando Méndez sobre la situación actual del consumo en España. Fernando es doctor en biología, ha desarrollado su carrera en el ámbito de la investigación en muy diversos ámbitos, ha trabajado desde análisis de calidad de aguas, artritis, terapia celular, infecciones parasitarias, análisis y cribado de sustancias psicoactivas. Fernando además ha sido asesor de diversas organizaciones como la Agencia Española del Medicamento y Productos Sanitarios, ha sido miembro del Comité de Medicamentos Huérfanos de la Agencia Europea del Medicamento y en la actualidad es consejero técnico del Observatorio Español de las Drogas y las Adicciones. Y en segundo lugar hablará Brendan Hughes sobre la situación legal del cannabis en Europa. Brendan es abogado de profesión, especializado en Derecho Penal Internacional y Derecho de Estupefacientes y viene de Lisboa, del Observatorio Europeo de las Drogas y las Toxicomanías. Su ámbito de trabajo es la legislación de los Estados miembros sobre adicciones y en concreto sobre el tema del cannabis. Fernando, cuando quieras.
Sergio, gracias por la presentación. Bueno, quiero dar las gracias a los organizadores por habernos invitado y dar gracias de manera especial a Manuel por el trato. Para mí es una doble alegría estar aquí porque no solo voy a hablar de algo en lo que trabajo y que realmente me gusta, sino que pues es un poco de cura para la morriña porque eu son galego y estar aquí pues para mí es un doble placer. Bueno, pues voy a hablar de la situación actual del consumo de cannabis en España. Como os han dicho, trabajo en el Observatorio Español de Drogas y las Adicciones dentro de la delegación del Gobierno para el Plan Nacional sobre Drogas. Voy a empezar simplemente explicando que el observatorio se nutre de información y esta información de las distintas adicciones llega a... ¿Dónde está el puntero? Tengo que ponerme las gafas. Aquí. De la población general de edades, que es una encuesta que engloba es que estoy acostumbrado a trabajar en la agencia de medicamentos y voy a decir la palabra pacientes, a ciudadanos entre 15 y 64 años y es bienal desde 1995. También tenemos la encuesta de estudios que incluye a personas entre 14 y 18 años, es bienal desde el 94. La encuesta de profesores EPAD, mayores de 18, también es bienal. Acabamos de incluir hace poco la encuesta ESDAM, que es para mayores de 64 años. La motivación es porque, según las personas, digamos, los que sufren adicciones, pues vamos todos, nadie se hace nada joven, ¿no? Pues vamos todos envejeciendo. Pues había un grupo de personas que eran adictos y tenían, digamos, sobrepasaban la edad que teníamos máxima en edades. Entonces hemos incluido a estos mayores de 64 años. Tenemos la encuesta de prisiones, a nivel europeo tenemos la ESPAD, que es cuatrienal, y después tenemos a nivel anual lo que son los indicadores de drogas, que hacemos en colaboración con todas las comunidades españolas. Tenemos indicadores de urgencias, de mortalidad, tratamiento por drogas, enfermedades infecciosas, consumo problemático y también adicciones comportamentales como puede ser el juego. Pues con todo esto es con lo que el observatorio trabaja y se nutre además de fuentes externas como el SEAT, TIPCO, del Ministerio de Educación, Hacienda, sociedades científicas, universidades y también de ONGs. Voy a centrarme en la presentación, los datos que tenemos de edades. Los antecedentes es una encuesta que se lleva llevando a cabo desde 1995 y el Plan Nacional de Drogas la realiza, como he dicho antes, bienal, cada 2 años. Es una encuesta sobre alcohol y otras drogas en España en la población general, en hogares. Digamos, los encuestados tienen una edad que está entre 15 y 64 años. Los resultados son representativos a nivel nacional. La muestra, pues, no es nada despreciable. En la encuesta de edades última que tenemos publicada, tenemos 21.249 cuestionarios válidos y tiene distintos módulos. Los módulos en este último edades incluían nuevas sustancias, que es un poco en lo que yo trabajo más dentro del observatorio, cigarrillo electrónico, cannabis, internet, hipnosedantes, juego, bebidas energéticas y analgésicos opioides. En cuanto al consumo de drogas, ya un poco centrándonos más en el tema cannabis, la prevalencia de consumo en los últimos 12 meses en la población del rango de 15 a 64 años, podemos observar que las drogas más consumidas con diferencia son el alcohol, el tabaco y los hipnosedantes, con 75% para alcohol, tabaco, pero vemos que para el cannabis, que es la droga ilegal más consumida de todas. En cuanto al consumo de drogas, prevalencia por edad, dividiéndola en 2 grupos, en grupos de 15 a 17 y de 18 a 64 años. Las barras de la derecha son las de los adultos y las de la izquierda son las de los grupos de jóvenes. Observamos que en todos los grupos, como el alcohol y el tabaco e hipnosedantes, digamos que el grupo de adultos tiene un mayor porcentaje. Sin embargo, el cannabis es, a diferencia del resto de las drogas, pues la que marca la diferencia. Y vemos que la población joven pues tiene un mayor porcentaje. Aunque bueno, también hay otros grupos como los alucinógenos y setas mágicas que también son de mayor consumo en los menores de edad. En cuanto a la evolución de las prevalencias de consumo, comparando edades de 2015, 2016 y 2017, 2018, observamos que hay una disminución en el consumo con respecto al alcohol, a hipnosedantes, pero vemos que con el cannabis se registra un aumento de consumo considerable, de 9,5 a 11. Si nos centramos siempre dentro de la encuesta de edades en los indicadores de edad media de inicio de consumo, vemos que el tabaco y el alcohol son las drogas de más inicio de temprano en su consumo, seguida muy de cerca por el cannabis. Estamos hablando de 18 años. Estaban hablando antes que cuanto más se retrase el consumo mejor. Bueno, pero lo que sucede es que tenemos que con estas 3 drogas, incluyendo el cannabis, la edad de inicio es bastante temprana comparada con el resto de las drogas. En cuanto al cannabis, a la hora de definir el perfil de los consumidores de 15 a 64 años, entre los consumidores de cannabis de los últimos 30 días, observamos que un 71% son hombres, con una edad media de 34 años, con un consumo de porros por día de 2,7 porros. Es interesante ver que el policonsumo está muy marcado aquí, con un 81,6%, mezclado con tabaco en un 92,9% y en general, si fuese legal, lo probaría un 2,4% de la población. En cuanto a la forma de su consumo, los encuestados declaran que los porros es un 97,9%, es que es una inmensa mayoría, seguida ya de muy de lejos por cachimbas, bioral, cigarrillos electrónicos, y en cuanto al tipo de cannabis que toman, la mayoría declara marihuana, casi un 50%, de los 2 tipos, casi un 30%, y hachís, casi un 22%. En la gráfica, desde el 95 hasta el 2017, observamos que los encuestados que declaran haber consumido cannabis una vez en la vida aumenta desde un 14,5% hasta un 35,2%. En los últimos 12 meses digamos que la tendencia es no tan marcada como los que han consumido una vez en la vida, pero se observa un pequeño repunte aquí entre el 2015 y el 2017. En cuanto a los últimos 30 días, sucede un poco lo mismo, está por debajo de los últimos 12 meses y de los que consume diariamente, la tendencia es bastante estable a lo largo de la escala que tenemos datos. En cuanto a los nuevos consumidores, también si comparamos la encuesta anterior de edades con la que tenemos la más reciente, de 2017 y 2018, observamos que en el 2015 había 159.000 nuevos consumidores de cannabis. Sin embargo, en la siguiente encuesta había 64.000 personas más en el territorio nacional que habían consumido cannabis, sumando 223.000 personas, siendo el perfil mayoritario para hombres que para mujeres, y el número de personas del grupo entero de 15 a 64 años que ha consumido cannabis en este año, en los últimos 12 meses, asciende a 3.386.000 personas que han declarado haberlo consumido. En cuanto al porcentaje de admisiones a tratamiento por drogas ilegales, ya no estamos hablando de edades, sino que estamos hablando de indicadores. Se observa que el cannabis tenemos un nivel que está cercano al 30%, siendo el mayor para la cocaína. Se ve aquí un pequeño repunte en los últimos años y un ligero descenso en el cannabis. Con respecto a la heroína, sigue una tendencia decreciente, aunque hay, aquí realmente no se pueden extraer muchas conclusiones con este incremento, y con otro tipo de drogas como los hipnosedantes y anfetaminas, digamos que es muy estable en lo que es el porcentaje de admisiones a tratamiento. Sin embargo, con el de urgencias, podemos observar que la cocaína ha experimentado un importante incremento desde el 2016 al 2017, lo mismo que con el cannabis, que están en el mismo nivel, están por encima del 50%. Sin embargo, observamos que con los hipnosedantes aquí y con la heroína hay un descenso, pero es realmente preocupante estos valores del cannabis tan alto en urgencias hospitalarias relacionadas con el consumo. En cuanto al consumo problemático de los consumidores de los 12 últimos meses, volvemos a la encuesta de edades de 2017-2018, observamos que el 67,7% son hombres con una edad media de 33 años, consumidores de porros diarios de 3,6 y con un policonsumo de 3 o más sustancias de 90,4, que esto supone un 1,6% de toda la población, y dentro de los consumidores de cannabis un 15,9%, casi un 16%. En la escala, siguiendo las distintas encuestas de edades del 2013, 15 y 17, se observa un pequeño descenso que, siempre es bienvenido en relación a los años anteriores. En cuanto al policonsumo, también dentro de la encuesta de edades, siempre dentro del rango de población indicado de 15 a 64 años, el patrón de policonsumo está muy extendido, siendo un 85,8% personas que han consumido más de una sustancia. El policonsumo se observa que es mayor entre hombres de 25 a 34 años, y el 90% de los policonsumos aparece con alcohol y cannabis, que se asocia a consumos de mayor riesgo, quedando solo un 16,5% de encuestados que declaran no haber consumido ninguna sustancia. En cuanto al riesgo percibido, que es importante tener en cuenta, pues aumenta el riesgo percibido ante el consumo de la mayoría de las drogas y la mayor percepción de riesgos en mujeres. El alcohol, con diferencia, es la que considera y se percibe como menos peligrosa, y el tabaco es curiosamente percibido como más peligroso que el cannabis. Observamos aquí que la heroína y la cocaína son las que se consideran más, hay un mayor riesgo percibido por parte de la población, y ya seguido por cannabis, hipnosedantes, y tomar 5 o 6 cañas o copas el fin de semana está muy por debajo de estas otras cifras. En cuanto a la prevalencia y riesgo percibido en consumo de tabaco, vamos a hacer una comparación de tabaco con el cannabis. De últimos 30 días, consumiendo un paquete al día, se observa que el riesgo percibido, digamos que al principio de la serie del 97, va incrementando hasta un 93% desde un 79,7%, pero el consumo es prácticamente estable. La prevalencia del consumo de cannabis, digamos, no continuado, sino consumo una vez o menos al mes, se observa que la prevalencia del consumo va aumentando y el riesgo percibido pues es prácticamente invariable, incluso un poco más bajo que al principio de la serie, aunque un poquillo ha incrementado un poco con respecto a la anterior encuesta de edades. En cuanto a la disponibilidad percibida, hay una tendencia estable para todas las sustancias, y la droga que se percibe como más disponible es el cannabis con diferencia. Observamos aquí que son valores superiores al 60%. Estamos hablando de si es muy fácil o no conseguir las siguientes drogas en las siguientes 24 horas en porcentaje. Está seguido por la cocaína, pero ya muy por debajo, y la heroína es la última en la serie. Pero observamos que lo que es con respecto a la población que percibe que disponer de cannabis en las próximas 24 horas es mucho más fácil que con el resto de las otras drogas. ¿Acciones contra las drogas? Pues la legalización de las drogas, que se ha hablado antes, se encuentra, decían, entre las más valoradas. Pues lo que dicen las encuestas es que se encuentra entre las menos valoradas. El porcentaje que considera cada medida para solucionar el problema, pues educación en las escuelas, campañas publicitarias, control policial, leyes, administración médica, metadona, y al final nos encontramos con legalización de cannabis y legalización de todas las drogas. Haciendo una comparación entre 2005 y 2017, observamos que también hay un descenso, digamos, en esa opinión de qué sería una de las acciones para solucionar el problema de las drogas. Entonces vemos que lo que es la legalización del cannabis y de otras drogas, en lugar de incrementar, está descendiendo. Acciones contra las drogas. Siguiendo en edades, dentro de la población de 15 a 64 años, el porcentaje de encuestados que considera muy importante la legalización del cannabis para solucionar el problema de las drogas es muy estable en los distintos rangos de edad, de 15 a 24, 25 a 34, 35 a 44, siendo un poco más bajo en el grupo de edad de 55 a 64. Sin embargo, en cuanto a la pregunta de legalización del cannabis según consumo de cannabis, si se lo preguntamos a los consumidores, pues entre los que han consumido cannabis en el último año, que tienen un consumo problemático, encontramos que tienen esa opinión un 63,5%. Los que han consumido cannabis en el último año con un CAS más bajo de 4 es un 52%, y los que no han consumido cannabis en el último año, pero lo han consumido en algún momento de su vida, es de un 28,3%. Y nada más, muchas gracias. Quiero dar también gracias a Marta Molina, la directora del observatorio, y a mis compañeras Noelia Llorens, Marta Brime y Eva Sánchez, que sin ellas no podría haber hecho habría hecho otra, no esta. Muchas gracias.
Good evening. You have another foreigner. who doesn't speak Spanish. Eu posso falar português aqui em Galícia e quase o mesmo. It's Friday night. In Galicia, we're talking about cannabis with a very aggressive audience, I see. Especially that group at the back. They're quite frightening. So I just show you a few things about cannabis laws in Europe. I'm going to talk about the penalties for using drugs and supplying drugs. I'm going to talk a little bit about recreational use, the idea of legalization, supplying cannabis for fun, not for medical. I'll talk a little bit about medical use. And then finally, a fairly new phenomenon around Europe, but I think it's been in a few countries, including Spain, for some years, which is products sold with cannabis, but they have not much THC in them, so you can't get intoxicated. But it's still a kind of advertising, it's a novelty. But these days also, maybe they're trying to sell CBD, healthy things. So, to be clear, what we're talking about, because if you ever read a law, go and find something more interesting to do. If you ever read a law, it starts with definitions, because if you don't agree what you're talking about, you're not going to have a useful conversation. So let's talk about decriminalization, which means reducing the size of the penalty. It means making the penalty smaller. If we talk about depenalization, it means not applying the penalty. It's a different thing. There's a few countries in Europe where they say the penalty is 1 year in jail, but if the offence is small, don't give it to them. Don't give any penalty. Depenalization. We can talk about diversion. So instead of thinking that we can solve the problems with a punishment, maybe we can solve the problems with an attitude more towards treatment or counselling. This is generally called diversion. Legalization. Legalization is not, you can see, the same as decriminalization, even if some people think that it is. And that's why the conversation is so confused. Legalization, to me, to us, means allowing some kind of supply. Once you allow the supply, then people can use. Let's be clear about all of these things. And for you, and especially for you, we have a video on YouTube in Spanish. We shot it originally in English, and then we had it translated into Spanish. So it's a 3-minute animation you can watch, and it should explain these terms. I think it doesn't have diversion. We left diversion off. Very simply, the red side is prohibited, the green side is permitted. And you need to understand these if you're going to have a discussion. So the first questions in Europe: what are the penalties for possessing cannabis just for yourself? Many people, especially in the English language, they want to talk about decriminalization. The problem is that in Europe there is no objective test for decriminalization. Different countries use different tests. So I can't show you a map. Even people inside the countries will argue between themselves. Experts will argue between themselves about one country if it's decriminalized or not. So I'm not going to show you that. I'm going to show you where you can be incarcerated, where you can be locked up. in theory. Not in practice, but in theory. So the first one is for consumption. The law will talk about consumption or it will talk about use. And sometimes this will be an offence. But what you can see from the yellow countries, in most of Europe, this is not even named as an offence. In a few, with the dark blue, you can get locked up, and in the light blue, Spain and Portugal included, it is an offence, consumption is an offence, but you can't get locked up for it. What this means, for example, if you go to work and you get drug tested at work and the test is positive, you could get charged with consumption. Does happen in the Scandinavian countries and the Baltic states, not so much here. What everybody has to have as an offence is possession, personal possession. When it's in your pocket, you still have a risk of giving it to somebody else. And the international drug laws say that you have to make personal possession an offence. So here you can see it's an offence in all the countries, but in about 1/3 of them, in a minor situation, small number of grams, first time offence, no other problems. In a minor situation, you cannot be locked up. The law only says that you will get probably a monetary fine. You have to pay something. Maybe they take your driving license away, but you can't get locked up. There are different reasons that countries will change their penalties. The penalties go up and down over time. And it is true that the trend in Europe is to lower the penalties. But what you have to understand is that the countries are not all lowering them for the same reason. They have different rationales, different logic. So in Portugal and Poland, they wanted to encourage drug addicts to go to treatment. So they took away the prison penalty. In Belgium and the UK, they didn't say anything about the drug addicts, they just wanted to save the money from the police. They're spending so much time booking drug users. Same result, very different logic. In Slovenia, Lithuania, Latvia, they changed the law. It was nothing to do with drugs. It was cleaning up their laws. I think it was Slovenia. They said, from now on, if we have anything where it says the penalty is less than 1 month in prison, we take it away. It's a waste of time. So the result is that people will say Slovenia decriminalised drugs. They weren't looking at drugs. They were just cleaning up their laws. You can also increase penalties. Some countries increase penalties, especially for cannabis, to send a message. They want to show that cannabis is quite dangerous and they don't want to encourage people to take it. But others will increase penalties for a slightly lateral reason. Not because they want people to get more penalties, but because their laws say that if the police is dealing with an offence punishable by a prison sentence, then the police have extra powers. They can hold you for questioning for longer. They can go and look inside your house. They can do this, they can do that. And so sometimes countries will increase the penalties to give the police extra powers, not to give the users a higher penalty. We've seen it 2 or 3 times in Europe already. And then ultimately people come to me and they say, so, this country changed the law. Did it work? So what do you mean, did it work? What was it supposed to do? And the problem is that countries will change the law for one reason, but they'll evaluate the law against another reason. Do you know why they legalized in Colorado? They legalized partly to collect tax revenue. It's stated at the beginning of the law. Do you know what every single question is asked about Colorado? Did the children smoke more cannabis? Well, yeah, that's a side effect, maybe, but it wasn't the main point of the law. If you're going to evaluate a law, you evaluate against the original reason for passing the law. Anyway, what happens when we change these penalties? Everybody's convinced. I've worked now following laws around Europe for 18 years, 19 years. So many times there is a discussion in the national parliament. The general comment is, we should make the penalty lower. Usually it's prison. We should make the prison penalty lower. And then somebody else says, no, you can't do that, because then more people will take cannabis. Or maybe they say the other thing. So they say, we want less people to take cannabis, so we should make the penalty higher. Fine. Well, in Lisbon, we track the different use trends of cannabis. Those are trends over time of young adults using cannabis in the last year. 5%, 10%, 15%, 20% of them used cannabis in the last year. And you can see those over the years. You can see the use rate go up or down. So what happens if we take the time when a country changes the law and we can see if the use rate goes up or down? It's very simple. So for these countries which did it, the blue lines, the penalties went down. They changed in different years, which means that we lined everything up to make a nice easy graph. So on the blue lines, the penalties went down. So after the change, what do you expect? Anybody awake? Oh, good. Hello, Galicia. If the blue line, the penalty goes down, what do you expect after the law change? Come on. And the red line, the penalty goes up. What do you expect after the change? The use should go... You can answer in English or Spanish. Here is shocking news for you. Drug users don't really read the laws. You can change the text of the law, but that itself probably won't have much effect, as we see. You need to communicate what you've changed, because nobody is going to read Article 27. We'll need continued police action. We calculate approximately that the risk of being arrested for smoking cannabis, from the numbers that we have, is somewhere between 1 and 6%. That means you have a 94% chance of getting away with it. Are you really scared about what the penalty says in the law? That's using. Let's talk about drug supply. Somebody shout out a country which has a long penalty for drug supply in Europe. Qualquer lingua. Long penalty for drug supply. I prefer these guys at the back. They're much more energetic. I just switched to cocaine because I have these slides, but I'm going to show you. This is the number of years in prison, what it says in the law for supply of 100 gram of cocaine. Can you see a difference? They've gone to sleep again. Can you see a difference?
Yes.
Ooh. So you can see the penalties in the law are really different. So from here, you think you know who is the toughest country in Europe against cocaine supply. But then, when we ask a group of judges and lawyers, what do they think the people will really receive for 100 grams of cocaine supply, the penalties start to look like this. And the picture really changes. So when you talk about who is the toughest country in Europe, are you going to talk about what's written in the law or what the people will receive? If you want to use this, go and read the study. It's not so simple. This is a scenario, and the scenario is not realistic, because that was the only way we could get the judges to answer the questions. This is a drug supplier who has no criminal record, no connection with organized crime, no guns, no. That person does not exist. But this is how we get directly comparable numbers. So now let me show you for cannabis, because we're talking about cannabis, and this is what the figures look like. Here I have to explain. On this side, some of the experts did not think that the offender would get inside a prison. Some of them thought the prison sentence would be suspended. Not all of them, but some of them. These ones, everybody agreed the person was going into prison. So some of these are suspended prison sentences. These all go to jail. The red line is the median. And then, because we know that good people get out of jail early, the green line is the amount of time we think they would really spend inside a prison. All different ways of comparing prison sentences for traffickers, but it starts to give us a first picture of the differences in Europe. And I can't prove it, but I would believe that if we repeated this for other serious offences, like violence or sexual offences, it could be that the countries would give quite similar answers. My guess is this is not a reflection of drugs. This is a reflection of the belief in long prison sentences. Some countries believe that you lock someone up and throw away the key. Others believe you lock them up for a short time, rehabilitate and release. Some words on legalization. Different reasons to legalize cannabis. These reasons have been given by the states or the countries who've done it. You want to concentrate on serious crime, you want to raise tax revenue, you want to limit the access for the children, because when you have a shopkeeper who wants to keep his license, he doesn't let the children in. And certainly that's been the case in the US up to now. Quality control. Same story. If you're going to ask, were these laws a success or not, you have to look at what they were supposed to do originally. Several people seem to think that legalization of cannabis means very colourful shops, like we saw a few earlier. But in fact, I'm going to give you 4 very basic ways to legalize cannabis. You could legalize growing at home. You are permitted to grow plants in private and smoke in private, nothing more. There are no shops involved. You could have social clubs, communal growing. We are now in Spain. I don't need to tell you about those, rightly or wrongly. You can have shops, but the shops are not run by private business, they're run by the state. So, to be honest, they're really boring. This one is in Quebec, in Canada. Some of the American states have state alcohol shops. Some countries, Scandinavia, have state alcohol shops. They have limited opening hours. They are very boring. They are very sober. They do not encourage you. They don't want to encourage you to buy more. Or you could have private shops. And this, you can't see so well, is a bar of Mile High mint chocolate, which has 10 milligrams of cannabis in every square. One dose. In fact, 1.5 standard joints almost. So different ways of legalization. Why do you want to legalize? If you want to legalize for tax revenue, you would choose the shops. But if you don't want the tax revenue, and if you don't want the children to see the shops in the street, maybe you would choose this or this. Different options. Depends what you want. The progress we have at the moment towards legalization, most people know about the coffee shops in the Netherlands. They are trying now to formalize their system, to clean it up. We know that Luxembourg, the government, have announced their intention to have sales of cannabis to residents. We don't yet know if that will be shops or sales points. And we know that the Malta government is talking about it. Those are the ones that we have at the moment. There was an announcement in Germany last week, but it sounds like they will consider it, but there's no guarantee yet. Moving on to medicines. Very simply, we have medicinal products, fully tested, licensed medicines, randomized controlled trials. And then we have cannabis preparations. It may be the leaves, the flower, powder, capsules, oils, some kind of preparation, but not a fully licensed medicinal product. These are the medicinal products that we have. We've already heard this evening. And these are the 3 types of cannabis preparations. Raw cannabis itself, very, very rare in Europe. Magistral preparations, where you go to a pharmacy with your special prescription and they mix up capsules just for you. Or standardized preparations. More and more, the standardized preparations are coming from the big companies in Canada, but we already had some available from the Dutch. They've been running a system since 2003. You might see these products, they look very much like medicines. They are carefully manufactured, but they are not medicinal products with marketing authorization. Medicinal products, we have these, as I mentioned. The availability around Europe, about more than half European countries license Sativex, which is for multiple sclerosis. Epidiolex received marketing authorization all across Europe about 1 month ago. That's only CBD. That's for childhood epilepsy. But the availability varies because some countries will reimburse the cost and others will not. You're allowed it, but you have to pay for it. And of course that makes the availability difficult. For cannabis preparations, the picture is looking a bit like this. So these countries in the dark blue have the possibility of standardized cannabis preparations. There's a few, who's that now? Austria and Slovenia only have magistral cannabis preparations, and the green ones when we did that diagram, which was 1 year ago, there's no cannabis preparations allowed. My guess is that map is already out of date. Things are moving very quickly around Europe. But should we be worried? Is medical cannabis going to take over Europe? Is everybody going to say, oh, I have a back pain? In Colorado, they say all the people taking medical cannabis are 19-year-old snowboarders with back pain. Funny that. Let's show you a quick calculation, which is that in Colorado they have 5 million people, 100,000 registered medical cannabis users. That makes about 20,000 users per million population. California, similar number ends up at the end of the calculation. Canada, they have a slightly more restricted system, and you can see it in the numbers. The Netherlands, where it's been going since 2003, less than 100 people per million population on the medical cannabis subscription system. I don't have the numbers for Sativex, etc., but we already heard at the beginning that there was less than 50 prescriptions given out in the UK in 1 year. So far what we see, medical cannabis is not sweeping across Europe as a backdoor to legalization, or it's certainly not being abused in large amounts. Finally, I'm just going to talk a little bit about this low THC cannabis. So this has been permitted for decades. Cannabis has been used for hundreds of years because the plant grows fiber, which makes ropes, which allow sea-going nations like yours and mine to become world leaders. Oh, those were the days, huh? And here we see the international law, 1961, says this convention is not applied for cannabis grown for industrial purposes. It's nothing to do with drugs. It just happens to be the same plant. And the European Commission, the European Community has been subsidizing cannabis. It pays to grow it. At least since 1984. And the point is, you have to have less than 0.2% THC in these plants. That's a really small amount. But what happens now is people are selling these. They're saying it's less than 0.2, so we can sell it. Here you are. You can buy White Widow, Black Mamba, Purple Haze, Super Lemon Haze. It's a CBD product, not THC, and as they say, it's less than 0.2% THC. It must be legal. Not true, but it's a good trick. So what we see from an analysis of web shops and from reports that come to us in Lisbon, we see two groups of supposedly users or target audience. You've got the group of illicit cannabis users who want the cannabis, but maybe they don't want to get caught testing positive in driving. And then you have a completely different group of people, the healthy, natural lifestyle people. They're not interested in the THC, they're interested in the CBD. Because if you've read your cheap newspapers over the last year, you know that CBD cures cancer, old age, and all the other problems that you have. So these people are all interested in the CBD. The problem is the product quality. They can have too much THC, we've seen this in tests, or they can have not enough CBD. They can also have pesticides. Carcinogens have been found in these oils, which are for sale in shops or on the net. And they're playing quite a tricky legal game because the limits for narcotics are usually in grams. The limits for agricultural use are in percentage. But let's face it, if you have enough grams of a herbal cannabis, then even at 0.2%, you're still breaking the law. This is the most important thing. There are different ways to deal with this. You could call it narcotics. You could call it medicines. You could call it food. Sometimes it's cosmetics because it goes in a cream. Some are regulating like tobacco. Suddenly, drug law is not just narcotics. It's really opened up for cannabis. Different ways that countries have dealt with this. They've said CBD is medicinal. You need a license. If you swallow it, it's a novel food. You need a license. If you convert something and it has any THC in it, it becomes a preparation of THC. That's illegal. Different ways that countries have responded to it. Chocolate cannabis. Para os viciados in chocolate. Supposedly on sale at a cafe near me, but there's no price there. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Fernando. Thank you, Brendan, for making the effort. No sé si tenemos tiempo, Manuel, para una pregunta. We have room for one question. ¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta? Sí. Manuel, lo que podemos hacer es que vayan preparando van contestando.
Ya hablando de las comunicaciones, en esta sala ya vais pasando los autores, ya está el informático aquí, aprovechamos, estará la comunicación número 1, actividad parlamentaria en relación con la concesión de licencias para el cultivo de cannabis. Comunicación 2, sustancias psicoactivas y adicciones, inclusión en la asignatura psicofisiología como estrategia en prevención de consumo. Comunicación 3, maestros alertas versus padres dormidos, percepción de riesgo de los diferentes personajes educativos entre el consumo de cannabis en la adolescencia. Comunicación 4, una unidad didáctica sobre el nuevo cannabis-tabaco del Grupo EBIT para reforzar programas de prevención escolar. Comunicación 5, intervención socioeducativa ante denuncias por drogas ilegales en menores. Y la 6, concurso de guiones, ¿quieres un porro? Yo paso. Este sería en esta sala. En la sala, saliendo a la derecha, en la de Celso Emilio Ferreiro, motivaciones en la continuación del consumo de cannabis por parte de las personas usuarias con fines terapéuticos. La segunda, comunicación 8, cannabis medicinal para la mejora de la calidad de vida relacionada con la salud. Y la comunicación 9, el nudo cannabis-tabaco, diferencias entre menores consumidores de tabaco a diario y no diario. Comunicación 10, porro encuesta, patrón de consumo del nudo cannabis-tabaco y aspectos sociales asociados. Y la comunicación 11, caracterización de los patrones de consumo de los menores policonsumidores y su relación con el comportamiento problemático. Esto sería en la sala 2. Y de paso, esto.
Sí, él no escucha la presentación, o sea, no escucha la pregunta, o sea, o la haces en inglés o intentaré traducírsela yo. Ah, vale, perdón. Entonces, no problem. Entonces, Fernando te puede contestar en japonés, en inglés, en castellano y en gallego.
Cualquiera de esas. Lo siento, no en catalán.
Mejor. Es que no sé si se oye, ¿sí? Sí. Sobre la opinión de la legalización, me llama la atención que la diferencia que hay entre el CIS y la encuesta del Plan Nacional sobre Drogas. Entonces, es verdad que la pregunta del CIS está, desde mi punto de vista, es muy imprecisa, muy mal hecha. Me gustaría saber cómo es la pregunta del Plan Nacional sobre Drogas. Y la otra parte es, un 35% más o menos está a favor de la legalización, pero...
Perdón, no te escucho, la última parte que dices.
Sí, que un 35% está a favor de la legalización en la pregunta del Plan Nacional sobre Drogas, pero no sé si se puede concluir que el 65% está en contra o hay un porcentaje de indecisos.
¿Me dices que yo he dicho que un 35% está a favor?
Sí, o algo menos. Me parece que unos años era 35 y luego bajaba a 27 o 28.
Sí.
Lo que quiero saber es si la opción contraria incluye los no sabe, no contesta también. Quiero decir, en el CIS tienes 47% a favor, 41% en contra y un porcentaje del 12% más o menos no sabe, no contesta.
Nosotros incluimos siempre no sabe, no contesta, decimos o desconocido, ¿no? Pero está incluido. Además, ¿no? Estas encuestas no las hace, digamos, el Ministerio por sí solo, el Plan Nacional de Drogas, sino que las consensa con todas las autonomías, porque esto se hace a nivel nacional y todas las autonomías participan en ella y en algunos casos incluso aumentan el número de casos incluidos en las encuestas. Se discuten todas las preguntas y se tienen en cuenta todos estos parámetros.
Gracias.
Vale, y yo, como hemos ganado un poco de tiempo porque están preparando las presentaciones, tengo una pequeña pregunta para Brendan. Just one quick question, Brendan. Le voy a intentar preguntar cómo explica las diferencias entre la situación de Holanda en comparación con los estados de Estados Unidos en relación con el uso de cannabis que nos presentaba en la antepenúltima diapositiva. Brendan, how do you explain the situation of Netherlands comparing it with the states of the United States regarding cannabis in medical use? That low amount of people using them, if you have one.
What we know is that the Americans had very, very strict laws against recreational drugs. We know that the Americans, especially several states, about half the states, can directly vote their laws. The citizens design and vote their laws. It's not the same as in Parliament where you have a group of technical experts. So they have voted in laws which gives them good access to cannabis. One of those things is as soon as you say you can use cannabis for chronic pain, you have an open book, because no doctor really can prove or disprove chronic pain. They have to listen to what the patient tells them. So anybody comes in and says they have a backache. There is another cultural difference, which is that in America, medicine is private and profit-making. It's not so much controlled by the state. One of my colleagues found out that doctors were charging $100 to write a prescription for medical cannabis for snowboarders with back pain. These guys are getting rich, and all they're interested in is increasing salary. Nobody's going to die off the cannabis. They'll do that off other painkillers. So there are various cultural differences which probably contribute to it. If you pay for your medicine, you expect to get a lot of medicine. You want value for money. We also know that whilst the Americans had nothing for 20 years, the Dutch have had their coffee shop system running for 20 years. So for them, medical cannabis is not so new. It's not the gateway to something that was previously forbidden. Because if they wanted cannabis, they could go to a coffee shop and get it. Very different attitudes, different beliefs, different cultures. Will that happen in another country? We don't yet know. But we certainly know that American culture focuses quite a lot on money as a measure of success and relatively small state intervention, whereas in Europe, generally, we more believe in the power and the role of the state to control our lives to a certain extent. And that way, the state is allowed to tightly regulate medicines, and it's trusted to do so. Again, different cultural beliefs.
Thank you very much.